So, Asha, was there anything illegal about sharing national secrets over Signal chat?
Eh, it's complicated. I'm Asha Rangappa. I teach national security law at Yale University. I'm a former FBI special agent, and I'm a legal and national security analyst.
And I'm Renato Mariotti. I'm a former federal prosecutor, a practicing lawyer, and a legal analyst.
And we're here to help you understand topics that can't be boiled down into a soundbite or a skeet.
Wow. There's a lot to discuss this week. I think it was so hard to even pin it down, but I feel like we kind of have to talk about this embarrassing, um, unbelievable um,
Breach
breach of national
of
security.
operational security.
There
Yeah,
you go.
yeah.
Unbelievable.
So we are talking about Signalgate today, where our war plans were being discussed on Signal with a rando invited, we think by accident.
Yes, and the rando, of course, being the editor in chief of the Atlantic, of all people. It wasn't even like just some random guy. It was literally a journalist who really could have just posted it all on day one. Like, here you go. Let
It,
here,
it,
yeah.
it feels like this would be an episode of Veep. I mean, because Vance was on it. You know what I mean? Like, oh, we just did a Signal chat and invited accidentally had the editor in chief of the Atlantic on it. I mean, it's so absurd and like mind-boggling that this actually happened. But we can unpack all the ways that it was very problematic.
Well, I feel like
In addition to being stupid.
I feel like in order to before we do that,
Hmm.
I suspect that there's some portion of our listeners who are like, "What the hell is Signal Chat?" So, and there's probably another portion that are like, "Isn't it really secure?" Right? Because to them they think of it as secure. So maybe can you lay out for some of our listeners who are not keyed into this what Signal Chat is?
Yeah, so Signal is a platform that provides end-to-end encryption of your messages. So it's, you know, theoretically more secure than, say, texting on iMessage or WhatsApp. Um, it doesn't mean though that it's, it's not the equivalent of a classified channel. So I mean, you would have to talk to somebody who knows more about, how encryption works and stuff. But from what I understand, it is secure in the sense that your messages are encrypted from end to end. But if your device has been compromised, then and if you're dealing with top secret information, you probably should assume that it might be. Then that kind of encryption isn't going to help you. In other words, if your device is compromised, I think someone on Blue Sky said it's like someone is looking over your shoulder while you're typing. So the encryption piece isn't going to help you on that. And I think anyone who has been in national security understands that your devices are not secure. That's why when you go into a skiff, you have to actually leave them outside the skiff. You can't even take your cell phone or laptop or anything like that into a skiff. So, yeah, that's what Signal is.
Yeah, I
Can
don't.
I add one more thing?
Of course.
So Signal has a feature that you can set a time period whereby the message disappears. So, in addition to, not being completely secure for classified information, it also doesn't preserve the information, which is another reason for using actual official channels to discuss official executive branch business, because actually under the Presidential Records Act, all of this stuff is supposed to be preserved.
No, that's right. And obviously, just to be clear, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I believe violations of the Presidential Records Act are not criminal violations; they're civil violations. Is that
That's right.
right?
That's right. And it's not clear to me how you enforce it. It's just it does it does state though that those communications, by virtue of the fact that they're being done, pursuant to official authority, are actually property of the US government.
Yeah, it's interesting, and one thing that I'll mention is the sort of thing that you have to be somebody who deals with regulators all the time to know is there's actually rules and all sorts of rulings by the SEC and CFTC and other regulators saying that entities that are regulated by them cannot use signal for communication for precisely the reason you said. And there have been massive fines, like $1 billion fines handed out to all sorts of big financial institutions because their employees are using signal chat. And you can't have, there needs to be proper record keeping so the regulators can come in to see what you do. And in that context, so it's essentially if a bank does it, it's not proper and you are entitled to you have to pay a massive fine. But if the president does it, it's not illegal, or so I've been or so Richard Nixon would have us believe.
I mean, it's still in violation of the Presidential Records Act. And, I think that we need to kind of just underscore that as problem number one here is the lack of accountability, right? The point of one of the many points of the Presidential Records Act is to ensure this a democratic value, which is accountability. You have a record of things that are being done in the name of the American people and the country. And, this is how we look back and we can, understand decision making that happened during Vietnam, for example, or during 9/11. These types of things are preserved. Um, so seems like a very deliberate attempt to evade accountability. And one has to wonder, I mean, it doesn't sound like the Houthi PC group chat was the first group chat that they had on Signal, right? It's I would suspect that there are many others potentially related to things like deporting the Venezuelan migrants or whatever, abducting people on college campuses. I mean, who knows what other discussions that they're having, but if they're happening on this platform in these channels that that aren't tracked or aren't preserved in any way, then they're just going to disappear forever.
Yeah, absolutely. I was operating tongue in cheek when I said that if I quoted Richard Nixon a moment ago. Although I will note, and it is a topic just to run through that we've been discussing for quite some time, that the Supreme Court's immunity decision would really mean that certainly the president couldn't be held accountable for anything that happened in relation to these signal chats. And it's an open question whether agents of the president, people acting at his direction, would also have some sort of immunity. Uh, uh, what do you think, Asha?
Well, I think you're right, except that President Trump denied any knowledge of this chat, which I was like, oh, okay, so I guess there's no official acts immunity here because he's not involved. And if he doesn't know anything about it, he clearly didn't give an order for them to do this. So they don't have that shield.
He was just lying to fool the libs in the media. That was what was happening there. That's not the truth. The truth is he was right behind everyone, telling him what to say as they typed in their little iPhones.
Yeah, well, he's doubled down. I mean, I think he's still claiming, that he doesn't know, and he's hearing this and he's hearing that. So yeah, I think the official acts piece is not going to fly here, or any kind of shield from that. And I do think it's worth noting that this does appear to be a violation of criminal law.
So yeah, and let's talk about that. I mean, one thing that I also want to say before we delve into that topic is, we were talking about it's out, on paper, or to somebody listening casually, if they're listening to this while they're at the gym working out or something, um, end-to-end encryption sounds very secure. But the difference is this is a high level of security if you're like Asha Rangappa or Renato Mariotti and you're trying to communicate in a secure way about some topic related to your business. It's not secure when you're talking about nation state level security, trying to talk about national secrets. It's sort of like, the difference in terms of security that you might have in terms of buying a security system for your home, which could be, it's helpful. It could be it's top of the line, but it's not at all the level of security that the president of the United States might have, something like that.
Right. And I just want to add, like, I mean, there's just so many layers here. So apart from Signal, as I mentioned, not being, a classified channel, it appears that some of these people are doing this on their personal phones. And one of the members of this group chat was actually in Moscow.
And that matters because it's much easier to them. They can actually intercept the signals that are being emitted from your phone because they're bouncing off of towers inside that country. Is that a fair way to put it?
Yeah, I mean, I would assume that would be how signals intelligence works, that they would intercept that. It's so outrageous, the content, and then of course the last layer being that they invited a complete rando, who happened to be the editor-in-chief of the Atlantic, and who, by the way, happened to realize what he was witnessing, and I guess after making screenshots, he exited the chat. So there were 19 people on this chat, and at some point, somebody called JG was in the chat. No one bothered to find out who this person was. And then when he exited, it would say, JG has left the chat. And nobody was like, wait, who was that? So somebody came in, somebody left. You know, it we're fortunate that this person, that Jeffrey Goldberg didn't, you know, publish this in advance. I mean, he could understand the national security implications. He did publish an article after where he withheld, by the way, the actual war plans. And then we can talk about the subsequent events after that. But in the initial article, he withheld that. But you can imagine if the wrong person were accidentally invited or privy to that information, that could really cost people lives, because we are talking about foreknowledge of an attack that is going to take place, in some kind of hostile environment, that will involve strikes and targets and certain kinds of weapons, which this is what intelligence is. You're trying to get foreknowledge of things that are going to happen so that you can prepare and, preempt whatever negative consequences there might come from that.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be, when you say the wrong person, like a Russian spy. It can just be somebody who doesn't care about or understand the importance of the information and just tweets it out or spreads it a lot, to their friends or something along those lines. Actually, the editor in chief of the Atlantic was actually very responsible here.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to emphasize.
Yes, and in fact, journalists often, when they're faced with information that's being leaked to them that potentially is classified information, they often have to make a judgment call, but in way the public's right to know about something that's going to happen versus potential cost to someone's life or national security or something along those lines. And here the Atlantic took, as you said, Asha, such a responsible approach. And the reaction to that by the Trump administration was there were no secrets here. There was some suggestion that maybe this was like done to smoke out leakers, smoke out the press, things like that.
Yeah, well, even before that, the first thing that was said in defense, by Hegseth when he was confronted about this, and this was like, by the way, he had like hours to come up with what his story was, but his go-to was, this is a this is a low life journalist with a terrible reputation who peddles in garbage, et cetera, et cetera. Which I don't understand how that's a defense, because it's like, okay, assuming that's true, why was he invited to your group chat about the war plans? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, in other words, even if you are right, that only makes it worse for you, because you must be aware that there are people like this out there, and one assumes that you would then take extra precautions to make sure that such people, that your information doesn't get into their hands.
I don't disagree with you, but it's interesting because some of the spin that Trump and his team put, definitely you saw it echoed on X. I looked at X comments. I looked at some of the comments on YouTube videos that were being published, by news organizations talking about it. And it's interesting to see that the sort of surface level explanation, which doesn't make any sense. Like, if there are no, I mean, if there's no secret here, why set up a signal chat and have all these important people on it? If you want to smoke out leakers, why would you invite a journalist? It doesn't even make any sense, right? None of it makes sense, but yet Trump has been able to try to obfuscate here. And of course, the Democrats are calling for resignations and they're calling for this and that. But they don't have any power in Congress to do anything. And the Republicans are standing with Trump on this as usual.
Well, it so happened that the day after this broke, a lot of these principles were in front of the Senate Intelligence Committee I think it was the Intelligence Committee, to give the annual threat assessment, which happens in both a public hearing and a private hearing. So they were all sitting there. And of course, the first thing Mark Warner does is, lay into them about the signal chat. And that's where they all testified under oath, by the way, that this was not classified information. And I think Tulsi Gabbard said that it was not classified information. John Ratcliffe said that it was not classified information. And that, first of all, that strains credulity, right? That attack plans would not be classified. So what is classification? You have classifications of confidential, secret, and top secret based on how much harm the information could cause to the United States if it were disclosed, or, if someone who is unauthorized to receive it got a hold of it. And I think, as I've just mentioned, I don't even know how you would argue that advanced knowledge of, war plans would not harm the United States. I mean, so it is by definition something that should be classified. And Pete Hegseth got it from somewhere. He got it from some operational document in the Pentagon, which I am certain has an original classification on it.
Well, I think what Radcliffe said, actually, if you listen to his words very carefully, at least the clip I watched, I didn't watch the entire hearing, was, I'm told I'm told that it's not classified, or I've been informed, or I've been told that. In other words, somebody told him this, but he's not taking it on himself. Maybe that person was mistaken. He hasn't, bothered to dig into this matter himself. I think that alone speaks volumes. It's kind of almost like a Bill Barr sort of tactic back when he used to be Attorney General, when he always had some slight, careful wording to try to get out of technically lying on an issue, something like that.
Yeah. I mean, look, they're not going to be investigated for perjury. But whatever. And maybe they were very clever in how they worded it. But the point is that, and I don't know who's told them. I don't know if Hegseth is the one saying that it was not classified, but in order to verify that, you would have to look at the original planning document and see what the classification was for that. So that would be in the Pentagon. So either you would have the Inspector General in the Pentagon do an investigation to understand, what this was, and that it was an unauthorized disclosure, or you would have the Department of Justice look into it, because this is technically a violation of the Espionage Act.
So yeah, let's talk a little bit about that. By the way, I remember, I'm old enough to remember when there was a criminal investigation of the Secretary of State, presidential candidate, for mishandling of classified information. My recollection, and it's been a while, but my recollection is that Donald Trump strongly believed in that investigation. He thought it was justified, and actually thought that the Justice Department did not go far enough in ultimately prosecuting that candidate. I don't know if you remember that episode.
I do remember that episode, Renato. And it's interesting because the provision under which she was investigated would actually be the exact same one that would apply here, which
What? No kidding. I'm shocked to hear that.
which is 18 USC section 793F, which says that whoever being entrusted with or having lawful possession of or control of any blank, 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 blank relating to the national defense through gross negligence permits the same to be removed from its proper place of custody or delivered to anyone in violation of his trust shall be fined under this title, imprisoned for not more than 10 years or both.
Which would be a
So
felony. That's a felony.
it's a felony. And note that it talks about gross negligence, right? So
Sure.
that's the intent requirement there. It doesn't have to be willfully, it doesn't have to be intentional. And, remember that was the piece that Comey said that in the Hillary Clinton case, he didn't believe that it met that standard.
Correct. And I will tell you, so I was actually in the Justice Department at the time. It wasn't until I just was leaving in 2016, like had just left. But what he was trying to explain was that while the statute has sort of a level, has the bar at a certain point, in practice, the Justice Department has required a much higher standard for actually bringing prosecutions. And his point was that even though Hillary Clinton may very well have been negligent, she did not act in a manner that showed that she was purposefully moving and transmitting classified information to someone else. And in that, and he used, I think, the example of the Petraeus case and others where that had been what had happened. The irony, of course, is, and the reason that I spoke in that way is because while I think what he said was accurate, I don't agree with the way he did it and the fact actually that he made the announcement the way he did. He was accurately describing DOJ practice. But of course, the irony being that Trump and all of his supporters were decrying this as an absolute travesty and suggesting that gross negligence and sloppy handling of classified material was effectively a crime that should be punished by death or long-term imprisonment.
Right. And what's the first thing that Tulsi Gabbard says after this all blows up? By the way, there's a tweet from her from, I guess, when she becomes DNI, where she's like, "We will go after anyone who discloses classified information and put you in jail," or something like that. But what she said after this all blew up was, well, this was inadvertent. It wasn't intentional. So her way of splitting the baby is that that you can't hold people responsible for something that wasn't intentional. And I don't know, you can tell me what you think about whether this meets the gross negligence standard. I think it does, based on not just the channel that's being used, but the fact that there was literally an unauthorized person who was part of it. It was actually released. So in the Hillary Clinton case, none of the people who were, I guess, getting those emails were not authorized to receive that information. And I think there were actually very, very few classified. There wasn't that much classified information that was actually being transmitted in that case.
Yeah, in her case, I believe it was information that was not classified at the time, but was later deemed to be classified, something along those lines. I guess the way I would come out on a broad stroke, what I would say is that under the statute, in terms of just hypothetically what the statute requires. I agree with you regarding gross negligence, but it would depend on who the person was. In other words, you could imagine the person who added the Atlantic guy to the chat. That person would have the bigger problem in terms of gross negligence versus somebody who was added to the chain later and didn't whatever, didn't know what was going on. It would be a harder case to bring. But nonetheless, I mean,
You
I'm
don't think Hegseth would be liable for gross negligence for actual, like, putting
putting
actual
the information in
operational
there.
details?
Right. He would be, yeah. I agree with you that there would be an issue there, although he would say I had no idea that there was an unauthorized person in the chat. I thought I was talking to the Vice President of the United States and others. I will say that I believe I'm consistent on this. I do believe in what I'm going to call prosecutorial guidelines. In other words, even if you technically can prosecute someone for possessing 1 gram of marijuana, federal prosecutors can set higher standards. And similarly here, it may very well be that the Justice Department has had a higher standard for what prosecutions under the statute, and they should treat everyone equally, Hillary Clinton and these folks alike. But of course, the hypocrisy is there, and it's very problematic for national security. I mean, to me, the biggest issue is not even the legal stuff. And I actually think Hillary Clinton echoed this point. She wrote an op-ed in the New York Times today talking about it. And it's like, of course, these people are hypocrites, but the real danger, of course, is the people who are potentially put in harm's way.
Yeah, and I want to also emphasize that whether or not the information was officially classified is not relevant to, I mean, it's relevant, I guess, in the sense of if you were going to actually prosecute it, but it's not mentioned in the statute. The statute only relates to, or only refers to, national defense information.
Right, and that's because the statute was created before our current modern classification system. So, it's really relating to national defense secrets and things of that nature, and certainly whether something classified would be relevant to that, but it's not dispositive.
Yeah. So, at the very least, it seems like this would warrant an investigation, an inquiry, at least to figure out what else is being discussed on these channels and what else might be compromised. Because I think at this point you might assume that there's other operational things or intelligence that could be compromised, but it doesn't look like any kind of investigation is actually going to happen. In fact, when Pam Bondi was asked about it, she got very indignant, and she said that she, I guess, without doing any investigation, that there was no, she concluded that there was no sensitive information discussed in this chat, and that we should really be congratulating these people for a very successful operation. And that was the first time I've ever heard an AG comment on the success or failure of a military operation. I mean, that's not really her purview. But yeah, she kind of just evaded the question of why this wouldn't be investigated.
Well, this is something that you might actually see in an ordinary time, a special counsel appointed. We've
Yep.
obviously had a number of special counsel that would be the sort of thing that would be appropriate. It's interesting, and I think it's an interesting contrast in that we had events in the early days of Trump 1, the first Trump administration, in which there was a special counsel appointed, and that in many ways defined a portion of the Trump presidency. And here, serious breach of national security, and there's none, no special counsel appointment. There's also, notably, no impeachment inquiry. And there were very significant events in multiple occasions during the first Trump administration in which there was. Now, obviously, the Republicans control Congress, but it's the sort of thing where Congress could investigate, obviously, if there was a different majority or if you had at least a few, like just literally a handful of Republicans with some backbone, investigate, not to necessarily impeach the president, perhaps, who by his own statements claims he knows nothing about this for now. But someone like Mr. Hexeth, for example.
Yeah. And I think for sure, it sounds like from reporting he's lost the confidence of the people under him, and that there are pilots who are very concerned about their own security and their lives because this is the kind of mistake, if you want to call it that, that could really put them in danger. And it is concerning because I think the defensiveness and the indignation, the acting as though it's just that this is no one should even be questioning them, suggests to me that they're going to do this again. In other words, it's not like they're contrite and gonna correct for this, right? And in fact, this is just to go back to Trump point 1.0. This is a continuation of like the crap that they were doing then. I don't know if there were defense plans being discussed, but we know from the Mueller investigation that these people were kind of communicating on Signal all the time for other kinds of executive branch, whatever, discussions and meetings and things like that. So, and of course, we also know post Trump 1.0 that there's not a very high regard for classified information because Trump had it stored in his bathroom in Mar-a-Lago. So, I don't know. This, to me, I think is very concerning just from a national security perspective, and uh, how much of our secrets, how much of our military planning that it puts at risk.
Yeah, look, it's really should be concerning to everyone, not just pilots. It's a national security disaster. And the crazy thing is that by next week, we'll be talking about something else and something else after that and something else after that. And this episode, this very significant and concerning event, may never actually be investigated. And it'll be interesting to see how and when the truth comes out in the history books someday about this incident and others like it.
Well, if it's on Signal, it's going to disappear. So I don't know if it's ever going to be in a history books. I don't know. I'll just push back. I think that it does seem like there are some Republican members of Congress who are seriously disturbed by this. And so I mean, not that I think this, like, there will be major accountability, but I think that you can see a little bit of the pressure on, when you see Trump starting to throw people under the bus, that he's feeling some pressure and feels like this is a story he wants to go away and he might need to blame somebody for it. And I think the last I saw, he was beginning to blame Walz.
Well, we'll see. I am not going to hold my breath waiting for Republicans in Congress to actually do something other than express extreme concern about a subject, because I don't want to die of asphyxiation. So I will. We'll see what happens. So, Asha, we have so much to talk about this week that our second segment really has to be authoritarian popery.
Yeah. You wanted to call it authoritarian potpourri, not fascism potpourri.
I feel like authoritarianism is a more accurate descriptor. And it's what I want people to understand and for us to convey is that we're not saying this is not like a glib fun thing where we're like, hey, it's complicated. This is us describing things that are happening that actually map to features of authoritarianism. And there's a real danger here. So that's why I want to use that term.
Well, I think they're both accurate terms. I mean, authoritarianism would be a concentration of power, which is obviously happening. And I think fascism is a form of authoritarianism where there's a concentration of power, but with violence that's used as a way to enforce that consolidation.
It's also like there's a element of having one party and trying to only allow one party and attacking an opposition party, and there are some elements of that here. But to
Okay,
me,
we're
some of this
gonna be more diplomatic and just call it
authoritarianism. I don't know if that's diplomatic or not. I don't. It's not exactly a form of praise in a democracy like the United States, but sure.
Okay, so authoritarianism potpourri. Let's go down the list. Wow, where do we even start?
There's so much to talk about. I mean, just today and we don't need to spend a lot of time on it. There's been a bar complaint against Emile Beauvais, which is interesting.
Okay.
You're starting to see
In the
uh,
DC bar.
DC bar. I think you're
Mhm.
starting to see some action against, Trump administration officials. Using people using the tools that they have. Which, I mean, a bar complaint is not like going to prison or anything, but it's something. It definitely distracts Emile Beauvais, who was Trump's private attorney, and the bar complaint addresses both his private conduct prior to taking his position in the Justice Department, as well as his conduct relating to the firing of Eric Adams. So that just happened today as we record this on Friday, the 28th.
And there's already a bar complaint against Ed Martin.
Yep.
Okay.
So that's happening. I mean,
Okay.
there's some of that.
Okay. So
Let's
that's
start on a happy
all
note.
right. Yeah, happy note. Another happy note. The DC Circuit upheld Boasberg's TRO,
Mhm.
um, which is a temporary restraining order, but it's a loss for the Trump administration that is really trying to get away with these basically these, I don't know what you would call them, forced renditions, abductions to third world countries.
Right. Right. Forced removal without any due process. Yeah. Or justification. So that, or very thin, unlawful justification. That's what we discussed last week. So that's useful, I think, to tie things forward. Obviously, there have been a lot of concerning developments as well this week.
Right. So I was really depressed after the second law firm folded.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not surprised. One thing I'll just say at a high level, people have to understand is that law firms are inherently, in many ways, unstable entities. And what I mean by that is they're collections of individuals, they're partnerships, and the partners aren't all on the same page. And I think for a law firm facing a threat, you're going to have partners who see things differently and partners who have different interests. And for every partner who wants to fight, you're going to have a partner who's like, you know what? I'm a private equity M&A lawyer and I want to continue to make money doing my deals. And I can take my practice elsewhere to another law firm with at a drop of a hat. And I can exit, and clients can exit and say, "Look, we need our deals approved." I'm just using these as an example. You could be a variety of subjects. I'm using as an example. We need our antitrust approval or something along those lines. We have to move to another firm that can do that business. And so I think it can create a cascade effect for certain firms. So I think Trump has figured out that these are in many ways weak targets and is targeting them accordingly. I don't say weak in the sense that they don't have any power, they don't have any money, but they are hard. They're targets that are
They're
that
vulnerable.
vulnerable. Thank you.
Yeah. Or yeah. I mean, so my problem with this is that, with any other business, I would like, even when, you've seen, um, well, I don't know what example to use, but I mean, if it was just an ordinary business interest, I could see, but this is the nature of the business is law. And there is a professional and ethical responsibility here to actually make your profession continue to matter and, exist, right? So it's a weirdly, you know, self-destructive kind of maneuver, because if you basically are then weakening the ability of lawyers to actually function in the society, then you're kind of starting to make yourself obsolete. And I think it's interesting that you talk about the, M&A lawyers and stuff, because I know that some people have mentioned that the law firms that are folding are ones that are much more heavily weighted towards their corporate practice. So law firms are broadly kind of divided into two kinds of practice: litigation and the corporate side. And my understanding is that the corporate side might be more interested in making a deal and smoothing this over and getting past it. And litigators who may not have those underlying corporate interests necessarily front of mind, or and who might just be fighters by heart because they're litigators. Maybe they're more willing to fight. I don't know. What do you think?
Mm. Yeah, well, one first of all, just to define a term so that listeners understand what we mean by corporate, we're talking really about your. It's a term that's being used to describe like transactional lawyers. So, like, if you're buying, if you're buying a company or you're selling your company or you're incorporating, you need a lawyer to help you draw up all those documents and structure all of that. And there's a lot of legal fees and all of that. But look, yeah, there are certain types of lawyers for whom their clients need governmental approval and need to deal with the government, and they have a very apolitical practice, and it's a stream of income, and they've been working on this stuff for a long time, and they have duties to their clients, and their clients are telling them, look, we just need to get our deal done. If you can't do it, we're going to go to someone who can. And a lot of what they're doing is just, I use the term M&A, but that's just where there's a merger or an acquisition of a company. But the point is, there are various governmental approvals that you need as part of that. Let's say the antitrust division might need to approve a merger between, two large companies, something along those lines. There are other types of practices as well, regulatory practices, where you're dealing with the government on behalf of clients. Litigators, I think you're right. Litigators, a lot of times there's some of them that fight the government. There's also, of course, litigators though who fight on behalf of certain companies who have their own interests and so on. It's not a perfect mapping, but I think the firms that are taking on the Trump administration here are firms that are much more in the camp of being very focused on litigation. They have a different set of interests, but I think all firms are in a tough spot. Some clients want the Trump administration fought, others don't.
And
Yeah.
there's a collective action problem, right? So it does seem like law firms, instead of banding together and saying we're going to stand up to this nonsense, are seeing opportunities, and so they are sharks circling the water. So as soon as this an EO comes out targeting a particular firm, they're going and trying to poach those clients and saying, hey, come over to us, we're not being targeted by the government. And that then in turn panics the people at the firm. I mean, I don't think it justifies it. I would really love for all these firms to stand up, but I'm just talking about the reality of like what is prompting the mass panic that then encourages them to go and try to strike this deal. Whereas if they were all to agree, we're not going to poach let's all agree we're not going to poach each other's clients, and we'll back you up if you decide to stand up to these people, then you're at least removing one of the factors that might exacerbate the problem.
Yeah, ironically, that would probably be unlawful as an antitrust violation, if you all agreed to do that. A true story. So that's ironic, and it would probably prompt an investigation. But secondly, yeah, there's going to be some law firms who don't want to have anything to do with that. Maybe they don't have any issues. Okay, maybe they have relationships with the administration or whatever it might be. But the point being is that is an issue. That law firms are competitors. It's a very competitive market. And like I said, the structure of law firms are such that big revenue streams can leave on a drop of a hat. And one, I think if you want to understand this dynamic well and you're looking for something that's written, Stephen Gillers, who's an ethics professor, very well known NYU ethics professor, wrote something about the Paul Weiss decision. And that's, I think, a useful thing to read because it talks about the ethical issues that were there for the chairman of that firm. In other words, that for example, there's a fiduciary duty to these other partners of the firm. There are duties to these clients. There are certain duties to employees and so forth. And the duties to these broader concepts are less concrete, right? Or
Mhm.
less at the forefront, whatever they may be, but they're not as defined. It puts the person heading that law firm in a tough spot. Now, I want to just say too, I'm not speaking for my firm or anybody else other than me. I'm just giving you my own reaction to this. I'm not talking about any firm in particular, but my point being is it's an interesting dynamic that is developing here if people want to understand it.
And there are firms that are standing up. So Wilmer Hale was also targeted. I believe that was the firm that Robert Mueller was at,
Yes.
um, before or after being special counsel. I can't remember.
I think both. He's disappeared from the website, but he was there after. Mhm.
Yeah, so so Trump is going after the firms that where, his enemies reside or resided, I guess. And they have decided that they are going to stand up to this and litigate. And I believe Covington and Burling was one of the earlier ones that had been targeted, and is also fighting back. So, we'll see. I mean, I think I'm seeing, I don't know about you, I'm seeing more statements from different bar associations coming into my mailbox saying that, this is like enough is enough. So I'm hopeful that this could be something where some momentum builds. And I do think that at some level, and maybe this is only for the litigation side, this is also bad for business to fold, right? Like, I mean, I don't know. I don't want to be represented by a bunch of lawyers who are fraidy cats.
It's a challenging situation. I think
I wouldn't pay that much money for a lawyer from a firm like that. If I had a case where I was like, you need to fight no matter what, I would want people who fight no matter what.
yeah, I mean, clients often are hiring lawyers and not firms, so to speak. They're hiring specific partners, and you may see a reshuffling of firms as a result. Like you may see certain partners moving and so forth. We have not seen that yet because there's a lot of uncertainty here. It's not clear whether this is something that blows over, just like a lot of the other Trump stuff that we talk about kind of comes and goes, or whether it's something that's going to have lasting consequences. And I think we're just going to have to see. But it's an important development that, we'll have to track and follow in the weeks to come.
And then finally, I think also maybe we should have started off with the bad stuff and then ended on the high notes. The abductions, I guess, from college campuses continue.
Yeah, I mean, there was I'd say, a really striking one. So, woman at Tufts,
Disturbing. Yeah.
yeah, disturbing. Where a woman at Tufts, I believe she had just broke her Ramadan fast. She was heading to dinner, and to eat at the end of the fast for the day, and she was approached by plainclothes officers who turned out to be ICE. It's very, like you said, it's very jarring to watch that in real time.
And from what I understand, the basis for her removal, so it's again under this whole foreign policy provision of the Immigration and Nationality Act that gives the president authority to, uh, or the Secretary of State authority to remove people if their activities interfere with our foreign policy in some way. And I guess this woman had written some kind of op-ed. And Marco Rubio was asked about this at a press conference after, and he was very proud of himself, this child of Cuban immigrants who fled an authoritarian communist regime, that he was very proud of what was happening and said, yes, if you cause a ruckus, we will get rid of you. And I guess ruckus now means expressing yourself or writing an op-ed. And this will have a chilling effect. I saw on on MSNBC last night a report that there are students who are alumni calling back to college, their college campuses saying, "Hey, can you take down this thing that I wrote or that whatever they wrote, some political piece." Um, I personally know that there are alumni um, who want like their pictures removed from websites. I mean, it's like it is creating this culture of fear where it's not just these people on campus and that who are there on student visas, but others who are watching this and feeling like they might get targeted as a result. And that I think that was Marco Rubio's intention.
Well, it's interesting in that it's obviously unconstitutional to take any governmental action based on someone's expression. And that's true whether you're a United States citizen or not. The United States government cannot take an action based on someone's viewpoint that they're expressing. And I think like some of the executive orders that we were talking about a moment ago in the law firm context, these are actions and statements that are um, ill considered and thus will be, I'd say, very skeptically looked at by the courts.
Yeah, and in fact, this actual provision that they're relying on very specifically states that it cannot be used based solely on essentially First Amendment protected political speech. And this is a little interesting tidbit. There is actually a court decision by Donald Trump's sister analyzing this specific provision of the Immigration and Nationality Act and finding it void for vagueness, which we talked about before. I mean, and basically this idea of no one has any idea like how to avoid this provision because what's the foreign policy? Like, what is exactly going to run afoul of this foreign policy? I believe that case somehow, I don't know, it became moot. In other words, it's not like even it's not still a binding decision even for that court. But it was just really interesting that I read this article where she had actually uh, struck it down as unconstitutional. So yeah, I mean, I guess they're just it's like a go big or go home, mentality, right? Like, I mean, they must know that this type of thing, or challenging birthright citizenship, or this crazy application of the Alien Enemies Act, that they may and maybe are even likely to lose, but they're just going to get as far as they can while they can.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I don't even know if there's this much thought that's put into this stuff. There just seems to be a lot of reactions that are not carefully thought out. And I think if I'm looking at an overarching take that I would have on the actions of the administration over the first 100 days or whatever it's been, it would be that there's a stark contrast between the careful planning and sophistication of something like Project 2025 and the actual actions and implementation of this administration, which at times have been haphazard, ill-considered, and destructive, even for purposes of achieving their own stated goals.
Well, that's what you get when you have DUI hires.
You mean DEI?
No, DUI.
Oh, wow. So, Asha, before we go, I noticed at the beginning of the podcast, we were talking about our affiliations. You didn't mention ABC. What's up with that?
Yeah, so my contract with ABC ended on Wednesday, and now I'm a free agent.
Whoa. All
Yeah.
right. Are you you're going to sign some massive contract now, like on the
No,
open market?
I'm not. And I loved being with ABC. They were great. But I'm happy. I think we talked about in a very, very early episode. There's pros and cons to being under contract. The pros are that you kind of have a home, you get to know the people and the anchors and stuff, and you get paid, of course. But the downside is that you have less flexibility in terms of your time. You can't go on other networks when they call, and sometimes when there's something very exciting in your wheelhouse, you get all of these calls, and you're like, I can't come on because I'm under contract. And I just feel like this is, I'm happy right now. I have other projects that I want to work on as well, and but anyway, so that's for people to know that they might see me. They might see me back on ABC, but also on other networks.
Wow. Well, I can't wait to see you elsewhere. I think we're going to see Asha Unleashed.
I should have my own show
Oh,
called Asha
Asha.
Unleashed.
I love it.